The new F1 year has come to an end, and Lando Norris is finally a world champion. But let's rewind to the 2024 season, a unique year of racing where Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and at times, Mercedes all fought for wins rather than just podiums. The season produced a record number of different race winners and some baffling storylines. One of Perez's worst years in the top 8, while his teammate took the title, a development that raises plenty of questions. After the championship, Verstappen said something that clinched the topic for me. He said, essentially, if I'd been in the McLaren, I'd have done it faster. And similar comments about Ferrari. Only Mercedes, he suggested, would have caused him trouble. That line convinced me that I needed to make a video about this season. If you look deeper than the final standings, it becomes clear that McLaren had the better car for most of the year. Something you can't really say about Red Bull or Ferrari for long stretches. That's exactly what I want to talk about today. How McLaren almost threw away the constructors' title. How Lando Norris, through a series of mistakes, lost his first, and possibly only, championship in 2024, and how close he came to even losing his vice-champion status. To do that, we'll recall all of Norris's errors and add up the lost points, so we understand how easily Lando could have been champion, or how easily Max could have been champion in a McLaren seat. First, a caveat. Despite McLaren having the better car, Lando was short of the title by about 63 points. And we all know this. For Norris, who is not Verstappen, a title wouldn't have been easy. A first championship is never simple. You have to perform almost like Lewis in 2021, collecting everything a car allows, while accepting that a few mistakes may still be possible. Let's start right from the beginning, actually, from even earlier. The previous offseason, McLaren started terribly. They didn't get the car ready in time for the calendar start, but updates and chassis improvements allowed the team to fight for wins as the season progressed. On the driver's side, they had Oscar Piastri, an outstanding rookie who put together the best debut season since Lewis Hamilton, and Lando Norris, who was considered one of the championship's top talents, fresh from sound results, and with many putting him on a similar tier to Max. The start of 2024 was a great chance to test that theory. At the very beginning, everyone again tipped Verstappen to be the man to beat. Fernando Alonso even said he'd seen the Red Bull with Max in the car and thought nobody else would have a chance this year. But Ferrari and McLaren did not look bad at all, especially given that McLaren's updates worked extremely well 2 years running and were delivered without major errors. The start of the season was therefore much closer to the leaders, even if outright race-winning contention was not yet certain. At the season opener, Verstappen confirmed Alonso's suspicions and delivered a dominant performance, his 5th Grand Slam. Norris, he later admitted, made a mistake in qualifying that cost him a front-row start. He qualified down in 7th, even behind Alonso. In the race, Norris only managed to pass Alonso and almost caught Russell, but a higher grid position would probably have put him ahead of Russell too. Still, the British driver's race pace wasn't spectacular that day. The net loss was small, but important. For our season accounting, we will carry 2 numbers. First, the real points gap between Verstappen and Norris in the championship, and second, what that gap would have been if Norris had not given away points through mistakes. To be a champion, you have to collect all available points. Verstappen showed that in 2021. 2 points may seem negligible, but when you carry them through to Abu Dhabi, you'll see just how many errors add up, enough to decide championships. If you think I'm stretching some cases, exclude any items you disagree with from the calculation. Also, we won't count moments where a teammate was simply faster. Different drivers suit different tracks, and Piastri is not Perez. So we won't rehash the fact that Verstappen never lost to his teammate in 2021. That's irrelevant to our analysis. In Saudi Arabia, Norris lost to Piastri in qualifying for the first time, and then in the race, he made a false start that seemed to mentally unbalance him for a while. McLaren's decision not to pit under a safety car didn't pay off either, and the sum of those things left Norris in 8th, while Piastri finished 4th. If we assume Piastri was marginally quicker over the weekend, Lando should have finished 5th and scored 6 more points. Had he not false started, he would have avoided the poor strategy that followed in Australia and Japan. In Australia and Japan, Norris did finally show excellent form and finished behind the faster Ferraris, but he was only a 10th away and single-lap pace from being in better positions. In Australia, he also had a free pit stop compared to Piastri and could have gone for a fastest lap. So as of the first 4 events of the season, There was one lost point in our tally. By the time we reached the season's first real development swing, Japan onward, Red Bull started to put out upgrades that didn't work as intended. By China, McLaren could finally be counted as the team to challenge. But it was there that Norris's mistakes began to form a pattern. After a Q3 victory in a sprint qualifying weekend, he started the sprint from pole, but was 7th by the end of the first sector and 6th at the finish. Race pace was again not McLaren's strong suit that weekend, but without the poor start, Norris shouldn't have fallen below 3rd. That sprint cost 3 points alone. In the Grand Prix, a timely pit under a safety car allowed Norris to pass Perez, and Max's race pace wasn't enough to match him. With a lead of 52 points, we moved to Miami. Though it could have been just 40, Miami marked the moment the title fight truly took shape. McLaren brought substantial updates for Norris's car. The upgrades were clearly working. Norris's first and second sector pace in sprint qualifying was untouchable. Compared to Verstappen's lap, it was obvious he had the edge. But in Q3, Norris made a mistake and was overtaken even by his teammate on an older setup. The unfavorable grid position led to an attempt to push through in the sprint. He crashed at the first corner while trying to make a breakthrough and lost at least 7 points compared to a likely second place in the sprint. That poor result reflected back into the main race. A similar subpar showing in qualifying can often be blamed on setup issues. However, in the main race, the McLaren's pace let Norris fight up the order, and he got major good fortune with a safety car that gifted him a free pit stop and the lead at the restart. He defended, pulled away from Max, and claimed his first win of the season, a result that cemented him as a real title contender. Still, on points the picture remained grim. Because of the sprint DNF, Verstappen actually extended his lead to 53 points, whereas Norris should have reduced it to around 34. Lando later said that at some point the gap that formed between him and Max seemed impossible to close. But things were not all hopeless. Remember, after 3 rounds in the 2022 season, there was a 46-point gap between Max and Charles that Max successfully overturned later that year. China was also a weekend when Red Bull was indisputably in command. After Europe, the RB updates would stop working completely and open room for McLaren and Ferrari to fight. But Norris then erred again in qualifying. A mistake in Sector 2 left him behind his teammate. A penalty for Piastri moved Norris up to the front row, but McLaren didn't capitalize with the tires, and a series of errors resulted in a finish many seconds behind Max. Now, our two numbers begin to diverge even more. McLaren's car was the quickest, and in Imola, Norris should have started to pick off points from Verstappen, yet Max increased his advantage, stretching the gap to 60 points. Despite the fact it could have been only 27, beyond that, Max would find things harder as the season progressed, because Norris's updated car was performing well on tracks with very different configurations. There were still 17 races to go, races where Max's car was likely to weaken, but Norris missed chances. Take Monaco. For 3 consecutive events, Norris lost qualifying to his teammate and started 4th, even though he had been fastest in Sector 2. Max qualified 6th. If you stack up the best sectors, Norris's ideal lap would have put him P3, Piastri P1, and Verstappen still P6. Monaco is almost impossible to overtake on race day, so starting positions lock the result. Norris thereby lost another 3 points. Points that would have significantly closed the gap. You feel how quickly Norris could have neutralized Max's early advantage had he avoided errors. In Canada, Norris missed out in qualifying by a whisker, but in the race he was dominant, especially as the track dried. Among current drivers, he perhaps showed the best wet-to-dry ability. If the season had been rain-soaked all year, his title bid would have been far easier. But Formula One is more than driver and car, it's the team too. McLaren made calls that cost positions. They decided not to pit with the pack and came in a lap later, losing 3 places. Then after the next stop, Norris made a mistake, and instead of trimming the deficit, the gap grew to 63 points. Fixing those errors would have required only a dozen or so better decisions. Spain, McLaren were back to their best. Norris took pole, but delivered another typical poor start, surrendering places to Max and Russell. He finished mere seconds off the lead while claiming the fastest lap. That race was a microcosm of the season to come. Austria. Norris qualified P2 for the sprint. By lap 5, he passed Verstappen, but then made a mistake at the next corner, letting 2 cars by and losing 2 points in the scrape. The British driver's race pace was still excellent, and you had 2 competitors on the same weekend with the potential to win. Max recognized McLaren's pace and defended the championship lead however he could. Norris often attacked optimistically and committed to risky moves up the order, moves he later admitted were impatient. A tire puncture affected both drivers. Max limped to P5 on 3 wheels, while Norris took longer and couldn't rejoin the fight, losing those 9 points. Points that, had he kept them, would have put him 4 points in the championship lead. But instead, with further mistakes, Verstappen's lead ballooned to 81 points, a truly massive margin. At that moment, some might call it done. Max could have been leading the championship after only 11 events despite McLaren having the quicker car half the time, and the gap would have continued to grow. But let's keep going. You can discard any lost points you think I'm being generous on, even if you ignore the errors before Miami. Once McLaren became the faster car, they should have won Canada, Spain, Austria, and Great Britain, all tracks where their car held the advantage. Winning those would have neutralized Max's cushion, and there would still have been races left in the calendar. At Silverstone, Norris qualified as the slowest of the Britons in Q3, P3 on the grid, but still ahead of Max on the day. Yet once again, a poor start handed a place straight back to Verstappen. His race pace was good enough to charge back up, but then the team made mistakes twice. A pit call, a lap too late, and then the wrong tire choice on the final stint, which dropped Lando behind Max into P3. So although McLaren continued to have one of the quickest cars, cumulative errors pushed the points balance away from Lando. Meanwhile, Piastri began to close in on Lando in the standings. Given the number of Norris's mistakes, his lead over his teammates spoke volumes about Norris's raw race pace, even when he was inconsistent. Hungary was the race everyone talked about all season. Norris messed up the start again, letting 2 cars through. He could not pass Piastri on track until the team pitted him earlier to undercut Oscar. After the undercut, the team asked Norris to return the place, which I believe was the right call, because he could not pass Oscar on pure pace, and the pass would have come only by team strategy. It was ugly for the narrative, and cut across the rookie's first win. Piastri should have had his maiden victory without that being taken away by a tactical swap. Those 7 points were sensitive. Removing them in reality would still have left Lando roughly 84 points behind Max. Virtually, had Norris avoided mistakes, he could have been leading by 14 points with 11 races to go. Stripping Oscar's first win would have been senseless and toxic for teammate relationships. The right approach was to keep the team together, which McLaren did. By the Belgian weekend, McLaren's pace was for once not compromised by penalties. Verstappen received a penalty and started P11. While Norris, across the season, had 0 power unit penalties and 0 technical retirements, a positive for consistency. Yet Norris still made a start mistake and ended up off into the gravel. By now, it felt like a good Norris start was rarer than a poor one. That weekend, he finished behind Verstappen, when a cleaner start could have seen him P3, cutting the gap to 78 points rather than letting it extend. In the Netherlands, Norris had a great weekend. Pole, fastest lap, and a win, even though he lost the start. To win from bad starts, Moriarty-type dominance is required, but the McLaren was such a strong car at times that Norris could recover. Red Bull, though, were having their own problems. By then, Verstappen said the team had effectively stopped developing that year's car and would move in a different direction to try to get more pace. In Italy, Max again had pole, but lacked race speed. Norris briefly gave positions away at the first corner, and repeated mistakes during the race left him third, not truly in contention for P2, as Leclerc played a risky one-stop strategy to claim victory. Piastri should have been in Norris's position, had Norris not made that first corner gaffe. Max, meanwhile, was P6, but the points gap had already reached 52 real, 53 virtual, and the gulf looked enormous. Azerbaijan was unlucky for Norris. A yellow flag blocked his chance to post a lap time, and that was difficult to blame on him. Typically, when Max has such situations, he often keeps his lap time regardless, and later accepts a penalty. It's better to extract the performance and risk a drop than to be knocked out early. We've seen that sort of Max move in Qatar 2021. That said, on race day, the McLaren pace was strong. Piastri won, Norris fought up to P4, and even passed Verstappen on the track. Nothing was lost there. In fact, that performance should have been dominant if not for the yellow flags. After that race, the stewards banned McLaren's controversial flexing front wing that imitated a DRS-like effect on straights. Singapore produced a good result, but was scary to watch. Norris was taking tremendous, sometimes unnecessary risks, grazing walls while having a 20-second advantage. Max, on a slower car at that point, minimized damage and rode out a season-long strategy of damage control. There simply weren't many great Norris weekends. The season's high points were a handful. In the United States, Norris survived thanks to upgrades that did not immediately click. He took pole in the main qualifying, but as usual, his race start dropped him to 4th. Then we had one of the season's best scraps with Max, arguably the best wheel-to-wheel battle of the year, but Max forced Norris off track, and Norris received a penalty. Whether it was for an off-track overtake or for leaving the track 4 times, Norris ended up P4 instead of P3 because he couldn't find a clean place to pass Verstappen, and Max extended his lead to 57 points. In Mexico, Norris lost in qualifying. By then, Verstappen had shifted into defensive mode at all circuits. Norris started with traffic behind him for 27 laps and received some heavy penalties for his defensive driving. Penalties that ultimately hurt his championship more than aided it. Even so, he finished P2. Fair enough, but had he started higher, he might have taken victory. Brazil, Norris was the clear favorite, but he lost sprint qualifying to Oscar, who then on the track ceded his sprint win to Norris, gifting an extra point. In the main qualifying, Norris delivered and justified favorite status, but again, a poor start cost him. He committed a start procedure violation that forced a second formation lap, and on the real start, he lost positions to Russell. McLaren's setup made overtaking harder because they preferred to race in clear air, so starts were vital. Had Norris led cleanly through the first sector, he could have opened a gap with the McLaren pace, and even a virtual safety car pit would not have dropped him behind Verstappen. Max had immense luck with a free tire change under red flags when a rival crashed. That's just one of those episodes where strategy and fortune play out. Still, what Norris needed was a lead early in the race, which he could and should have built. At the race restart, Norris chose an odd approach, while Max produced the season's best drive to take the win, starting from 17th after an engine penalty, and extended the lead to 63 points. Virtually, Norris would have been leading the championship by 83 points before Las Vegas. In Vegas, McLaren simply did not have the pace. Max did the minimum he needed to clinch the title there, and did so with a 63-point margin. But Norris could have become champion in Vegas had he not given his sprint win to Piastri voluntarily, and had he not been caught out by a yellow flag mistake in the race. Remember, Norris was racing all day in Max's dirty air, but matched the RB's pace. Imagine if he'd cleared the field. In the sprint, Norris could have been half a second clear per lap, but chose to give Piastri the win, more lost points. At that stage, Norris was 80 points behind Max, and just 9 points up on Leclerc going into Abu Dhabi. Lando had not lost the championship mathematically yet, but he had squandered the chance to celebrate with 2 trophies. Instead of trailing by 63, he could have been leading by 114. That's how many points he left on the table during the year. If you think I've imagined some of this, even the most zealous Norris supporters can't erase that difference. To reverse it in Max's favor would require an almost impossible rewriting of reality, because a driver in a car as good as McLaren's in 2024 should have been champion. Now, is Verstappen's claim fully true that he would have won in the McLaren too? It's both yes and no. If a Red Bull clone had kept Max comfortable, he would have taken the title roughly at the same time we saw Norris's near miss become final. If he'd had an absolutely ideal ride every weekend, he might have wrapped it up 2 races earlier. This season was one of Max's best, especially compared to his weak 2023, but it's not at the level of the 2021 Hamilton battle. Could he have done it in a Ferrari? Less likely. Against Norris alone? Probably yes, given how close Charles ended the year in similar conditions. In a Mercedes, I think Max would manage 2nd or 3rd at best. A title would be unrealistic without a genuinely exceptional W car. Still, it was a nerve-wracking year, and Max himself admitted he wants to put that particular car in a museum and never touch it again. What about McLaren's loss of the Constructors' Trophy, almost to a slower Ferrari? Zach Brown said the team was only 7/10 away from losing the Constructors' crown. Imagine that. If Norris's final stint at the last race had been 2.7 seconds behind instead of 2.0 seconds, a Ferrari could have hooked into his wing and overtaken him on the straight thanks to better top speed and hotter tires, and Ferrari might have walked away with the win and the Constructors' Trophy. Andrea Stella has repeatedly said that the driver's title is more significant and that such opportunities to strike are rare. Red Bull didn't look like the preeminent favorite before the end of that regulation period, but the points Verstappen created make a difference. He generated swing differences of up to 170 points between two result scenarios. Zach Brown has said he'd love a driver like that. Just watch Brazil. It was one of the finest drives I've ever seen. I've watched F1 for 35 plus years, and Max is one of the greats. You can beat him, but you must be at your absolute best. McLaren simply didn't show a season-long, perfect performance. They squandered a rare chance. For all that they did manage to secure the Constructors' Cup, and only just. They nearly gave it away to a significantly slower Ferrari. With the way their car evolved, McLaren still made mistakes and were vulnerable. Next year, if Hamilton returns to form, Ferrari will be McLaren's main rival, and Aston Martin could also fire up. Now is not the time to be satisfied with our level. It's time to raise the bar. I agree completely. If the team plans to fight for both titles next year, they must actually do it. Red Bull might fade, Mercedes might rejoin the fight. For Lando himself, winter work on starts and some mental game adjustments are essential. He's not Max yet, and I suspect Max is slowly moving toward being considered among the greatest drivers ever. Write in the comments who you think most deserves the title right now. Quick note, my content is now on Odnoklasniki too. You'll find all new videos and F1 news there. Subscribe. This season wasn't bad at all. Many great races, several rainy rounds, and greater emphasis on racing in mixed conditions and qualifying. Stewarding decisions remain contentious, but I hope the FIA keeps improving. What's crucial is that we now see the effects of budget caps and aerotunnel restrictions tied to championship position. Those mechanisms let slower teams catch up to faster ones. For my predictions this season, I wasn't far off in the top 10. I expected Perez to have problems, though not to be dropped from the team mid-season, which I didn't foresee. I overestimated Aston Martin's struggles and underestimated Haas, which with Kamui, or rather, with the incoming changes, has shown some promise. Perhaps with Toyota support, they'll climb out of the depths. And finally, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be grateful for every new viewer, and we'll keep working hard to bring better F1 content.